Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Just going to give everybody a few minutes to join us before we get started, just a minute or so. And I apologize if you hear barking in the background. I have 5 dogs, so we're going to try to keep them quiet for this, but just a heads up for our audience today. All right. See those participant numbers going up. Okay, why don't we get started so we don't delay this important conversation. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Andrea Carmona. I am the Manager of Public Affairs at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this important conversation that we're going to have today. Before we do, I just want to acknowledge that while we meet in cyberspace, I am coming to you from the city of Mississauga, which is on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat and the Wyandot nations. We recognize these peoples and their ancestors as peoples who inhabited these lands since time immemorial. The city of Mississauga is now home to many global Indigenous peoples, and we are thankful for the opportunity to work, live, and play on this land. Today's webinar will explore inclusive human resource practices and considerations and how to tap into new talent pools by recruiting and hiring immigrants. This session will address the challenges and barriers faced by immigrants in the recruitment process, recruitment practices that recognize a wide range of skills and talents, and the ways that immigrants drive economic success. We're thrilled to be joined by a panel of diverse experts. We've got Patrick, Lucia, Sorana joining us. And to kick us off, I would like to introduce Juan Marciai, who is the Director, Research Special Projects at the Diversity Institute at the Ted Rogers School of Management at Toronto Metropolitan University. Originally from Brazil, he received his PhD in political science from the University of Toronto and his BA and MA in political science from McGill University. Before I turn it over to Juan, I just wanted to note that ASL interpretation will be provided during this event and questions will be taken through the Q&A function. And with that said, please join me in welcoming Juan Marciai.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for that introduction, for getting us started. Bonjour, Anin, Kwe, Sego, hello, everyone. Just really happy to be here today to share and this time with our panel of experts. Really looking forward to the discussion. But before then, I just wanted to briefly set up a bit the context and go over some of the background information that I think would be really would help kind of contextualize a little bit of the discussion that we're going to be having. So next slide, please. And thank you, my colleague Caitlin, for helping me out with the slides. Some days you can't, chew gum and climb stairs at the same time. It's one of those days. So thank you, Caitlin. So today, as the overview there lays out, I will be just covering some key elements in the topics that Andrea laid out for today's webinar. So next slide, please. Now, first, just a quick word about the Diversity Institute, where I'm the current Director of Research and Special Projects. The Diversity Institute was founded in 1999, and we currently have over 100 full-time researchers and staff, and really have a very diverse, very broad network of partners in industry and government and community. That really is a big part of the power of that work that the Diversity Institute is doing. Now, the Institute's main focus is to undertake research to advance diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And a lot of this involves action research that is focusing on advancing our knowledge about barriers that are faced by equity-deserving groups, also leading practices to effect change and to produce some concrete results. We're also, I mean, and that's one of the really interesting and important things about the work of DI, as we call it, is its commitment to social justice, but at the same time, a really, really firm grounding on the business case for diversity and inclusion, right? So that is one of the aspects. I mean, part of the discussion today, I'll try to make it clear with the presentation. We house, for example, the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub. We're also, DI is the research lead for the Future Skills Center, and very importantly too, an ecosystem partner for the 50/30 Challenge, which is a federal government initiative to encourage organizations to advance gender parity and to increase diversity of equity deserving groups on their boards and on senior leadership roles. I'll say a few more words later in the presentation about the 50/30 Challenge, but just wanted to mention it here as well. Next slide, please. Now, there is a very strong business case for diversity, just to get us started. There's a lot of research indicating that, for example, diverse firms are more effective in developing unserved markets, as well as serving international markets. Firms that have a more diverse leadership, for example, have been shown to be about 70% more likely to report their firm captured a new market, right? So that element is oftentimes found in these more diverse companies with more diverse leadership. Equity, diversity, and inclusion is increasingly the focus of investors, of government grants, of procurement, for example. Also, more diverse firms may be more innovative, and that helps generate more income that's derived from these new products, from new services. Diversity also, especially at the decision-making table, really enables new ideas for marketing and a more creative decision-making, product development, and organizations with gender diversity in policies or practices, encouraging such have been shown to be linked with greater employee retention, as well as policies or other aspects and other dimensions of diversity as well. Diversity finally helps mitigate legal and reputational costs oftentimes, and address legislative and regulatory demands as I mentioned earlier, as EDI becomes more central to the work of governments and regulators. For example, taking proactive action is oftentimes really productive, right, in that sense. So next slide, please. Now, all of these benefits that stem from action toward promoting diversity and inclusion in an organization are particularly relevant when we look at the reality facing many immigrant populations. Now, those are some of the potential outcomes that I just covered of taking actions to address the challenges faced by immigrants in employment and skills development, right? All those benefits in that business case, if you will, that I just presented. But many immigrants face a very difficult situation in the labor market, right? They oftentimes face unemployment or are trapped in low-wage, precarious jobs that often don't recognize or don't make use of their whole skill set and really pay well below their skill level. Now, what are some of those challenges? As laid out in the slide there, we have the problem of unrecognized expertise or unrecognized knowledge from these job seekers, a devaluation of the credentials that they may be bringing to Canada when they come here, a lack of access to networks, since so much of that process works along those networks that are formed. Language and communication barriers, on the employer side, at oftentimes biases and discrimination, and that ever-present lack of Canadian experience. Right? Next slide, please. Now, we see that these numbers here really show a frustrating and really disempowering experience. The effects of these stats are really not only financial. Of course, a lack of recognition has that impact on employment and wage level, but it has a deeper impact on self-worth as well that I think is important to underline, as well as one's understanding of how they can best contribute to the world around them, right? I mean, that kind of effect is also seen. But we see these quite alarming numbers that have been found in research. And I just also wanted to underline some elements of intersectionality at play, with the higher numbers of women with foreign engineering degrees facing more of those difficulties. Next slide, please. And we see a certain dissonance, I think, in relation to the labor market here, where despite claims of skills and labor shortages, many companies still do rely on traditional methods to recruit workers, to promote them. And at the same time, we do know there are wage and employment gaps for many equity deserving groups. So a lot that has shown that systematic or systemic racism and discrimination, microaggressions, for example, they all permeate many of these processes, many of these institutions and workplaces. For example, applicants with quote unquote foreign sounding last names have been found to be about 20% less likely to get interviews. But at the same time, there's also evidence that once employers have experience with hiring immigrants, they are more likely to continue to hire them, right? So there are solutions there that we need to be exploring. So next slide, please. Now, the next few slides are going to be covering some practical solutions that have been found, that have been followed by some companies, and some ideas to put out there to help with this discussion, right, of what can we do. And so around the question of language, we have limited, we see in many cases that limited proficiency, but that it really shouldn't stop employers from hiring otherwise job-ready candidates, right, with the technical skills that they need. And many companies are finding very creative ways, or finding many different ways to offer employment to these newcomers, to these immigrants, while language skills are being developed, right? And there are a number of different ways in which this has been sought. Next slide, please. Here we have some examples, some best practices that some companies have followed. For example, with on-site language training, right? Companies like NOMS and Palliser Furniture that have, as the slide points out, offered some training that has really been helpful to these workers. In other cases, like 3M, training its hiring managers to really ensure that the right things are being screened for, right? That so that candidates be screened first for their technical skills, and that not be missed because of lack of language proficiency. Next slide, please. Now, the challenge around experience and skills manifests itself in a variety of ways. Like, as we mentioned, immigrants often face the misrecognition or lack of recognition of their skills or their foreign credentials. Many can't get a foot in the door due to, as we mentioned earlier, that lack of quote unquote Canadian experience. But many hiring candidates with no, many companies or many organizations are really hiring candidates with no prior experience or skills in a specific trade. And it's not, it's really not as uncommon a practice as some may think. And this, again, some of the creative ways in which that is being done include short-term paid work opportunities. Here, the example in the slide of Siemens, the German multinational company that really is providing that as one option. Next slide, please. Now, related to the problem of lack of recognition of foreign credentials are questions of documentation of that education, and as well as the international transferability of credentials, right? Oftentimes, refugees or other newcomers may not be able to provide documentation of their credentials, and that oftentimes ends up creating some challenges, some barriers. And here again, companies are really finding very creative ways. Next slide, please. Now, apart from these technical skills, soft skills are also, I just wanted to underline how important these soft skills and cross-cultural understanding are important for onboarding and fostering this positive work environment. And here, again, we have some strategies that have been put in place by many companies that really have helped with strengthening that and allowing many of these immigrants to work and progress and increase their skills on those soft skills in that area as well. Next slide, please. Now, traditional recruitment practices tend to be very rigid in the kinds of skills, competencies, and credentials that a candidate needs to demonstrate. And oftentimes, immigrants and internationally trained workers do not fit that mold very well. Now, given the many challenges regarding the best ways to assess the knowledge, the skills, and the competencies that these professionals face, I'll just go over fairly quickly a couple of some of these ways in which that assessment can be put in place. We will, by the way, also be sharing these slides later, so everyone can take a closer look, a more careful look at some of these examples. Now, self-assessments are one good way of doing this, assessing those skills and those competencies. It enables applicants to really make personal, professional decisions that are really better informed. And so this is really helps deal with some of those challenges that we were mentioning earlier. Next slide. Some written examinations have also been used as very useful tools for assessing what applicants know and really getting to their skill set rather than getting lost with some of the other elements. Next slide. Oral questioning. Now, that is also another oftentimes very useful strategy for doing this, for having a better sense of the skills and competencies of immigrants. Next slide. And demonstrations and observations too have been shown to be quite effective in achieving that. Next. Portfolios are often they're really useful in the sense of presenting a fuller picture, right, of the individual, of the person's life of work, and really helping applicants highlight what they've learned from their work, from their education, helps them identify their strengths, their limitations. So another useful tool. Next slide, please. Cross-cultural interviewing. Now, barriers of language are also closely associated with the challenges of crossing cultural lines. So training and practice in cross-cultural interviewing can really be a very useful tool. And here in the slide, you can see some of these elements that really play out and really help with breaking some of those barriers. Next slide. Now, the fine tuning of the tools and their the regular monitoring to adapt them as needed is also important. And here in the bullets in the slide, you can see some very interesting ideas of how some of these may be done. Next slide, please. Same thing here about some examples of how some questions that are oftentimes faced may hit some cultural barriers, some cultural walls, and ways in which things may be rephrased. Next, please. So how can we approach the challenges being discussed here today? What are some of the approaches and tools that we can use to help promote greater recruitment of immigrants? I just wanted to mention here a lot of the approach that the Diversity Institute uses, but that also I think is really useful much more broadly, is this ecological approach to change. Understanding that all of these issues that we're going to be talking about today operate at 3 different levels, right? At the societal level, at the organizational level, and the individual level, and that they're all interconnected. Not only for us to understand the challenges and the barriers, but also to find change. Change and the generation of change is operating at all levels as well. So let me just wrap up the presentation by looking at some of these. So at the societal level, we see here some cultural assumptions around, diversity, right? Think manager, think male, but also the importance of legislation and regulation, right? How those can help shape, how those can help change and generate change. So all of these socioeconomic factors, environmental factors, they all operate to both create some of these barriers, but also to be targets for change. Next slide, please. And the 50-30 challenge is really a great example of how initiatives can be put in place at a more systemic level to encourage change at the organizational level, right? Aimed at engaging with and addressing many of the challenges that are faced by workers at an individual level. So how the 3 are connected. As I mentioned, DI is an ecosystem partner of the 50-30 challenge, that initiative to encourage organizations to advance gender parity. So 50% of women and non-binary people, and increased diversity. So 30% representation of equity deserving groups on boards and on senior leadership roles. Now, the challenge applies to all kinds of organizations, and we have at the time over 1,800 signatories today. Next, please. Now, at the organizational level, I wanted to mention the diversity assessment tool. Now, many organizations, especially small and medium enterprises, do face, skills and labor shortages and so on. Now, the diversity assessment tool was developed by the Diversity Institute with a range of partners to support these organizations to develop their EDI strategies that are really aligned to their business needs, something that's a bit more personalized, that really speaks to the specific conditions of those organizations. And that allows, gives, templates and examples that helps companies really identify opportunities, take action, and create sustainable change. For anyone interested in learning more about the DAT, as we call it, the diversity assessment tool, you may send an email to datapp@torontomu.ca. Be happy to give more information. Now, the DAT works at different dimensions that you can see on this slide. Next slide, please. And there are also individual actions, again, to wrap up the different levels, right? Change is also generated, change is also sustained through individual actions. And there are many things that we can all strive to do. And the micropedia of microaggressions, just to mention it here, a very useful tool that allows you to browse through some of these examples of microaggressions and their impact on equity deserving groups. A really useful tool to help address that for leadership and everyone else. Right? So I wanted to end with a message that not only we ought to change the narrative around immigrants and economic success and growth, it's very much within the reach of organizations. Right? It takes some conscious and concerted effort to help generate that change, but it definitely is a win-win opportunity for immigrants and enterprises of all sizes. So thank you very much. I'd like now to move to our main attraction. Really, I was just setting up the stage, and I'd like to move on to our conversation with our guest panelists, Sarana Sandy from Skills for Change, Patrick McKenzie from Immigrant Employment Council of British Columbia, and Lucia Makhtar from the Diversity Institute. So I'd like to start by asking each one of you, and we'll go in that order, Sarana, Patrick, and Lucia, to please introduce yourself and share a bit about your organization and the work that it does before we move on to some questions that I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. That was really great information that you're sharing, and great work that's being done by the Diversity Institute. Thank you so very much for inviting me here. So as one mentioned, I'm with Skills for Change. I'm the CEO of Skills for Change, and our organization just celebrated a few months ago 40 years of existence, and we work with newcomers, so immigrants and refugees, and also with underserved groups around skills development, language training, settlement, entrepreneurship, mental health services, and specialized bridging programs for newcomers to really improve labor market attachment rates. And we do that across the Greater Toronto, Hamilton area, from pre-apprenticeship programs to trades programs to accounting, healthcare, and finance, to really helping newcomers figure out whether they want to be an employer and creating new businesses, through entrepreneurship training, or an employee. And we do that through training and mentorship and program delivery. And we work to ensure that they create networks through the mentorship programs that we deliver. And the other side of program delivery, we do a lot of work around helping with system change. So we have conferences and training and webinars and so on around diversity and inclusion, mental health, gender-based violence, and its impact on labor market attachment, and also people's ability to thrive. And we also focus on highlighting the contributions that newcomers make to Canada, Canadian society, and economy through awards, recognition, and conversations about the value of newcomers to the Canadian community.
Thank you very much, Sarana. Patrick?
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. So I'm Patrick McKenzie, and I'm the CEO of the Immigrant Employment Council of British Columbia. So we're a nonprofit based in Vancouver, but we have a network right across the country of like-minded organizations who are working with us. We differ slightly from others in the traditional immigrant settlement environment or ecosystem, in that we put the employer first. Ultimately, there are lots of organizations that are very much geared towards preparing the immigrant ready for the labor market. We're answering the question of who's getting the labor market ready for the immigrant, who's helping employers understand that there is an immigrant talent pool out there, and trying to shape one, sort of the ecosystem around economic immigrant selection, and then labor market integration as well. And so how do we work with employers to help them shape that and inform that, but then give practical solutions to bring newcomers into the workplace? That's sort of us in a nutshell. And certainly very grateful to Future Skills Center for the support that they've given us over the years, and our partnership with the Diversity Institute. So we've seen sort of great fruits come out of that. So
thank you, Patrick. Lucia.
Thank you, Juan, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm very pleased to be here as well. My name is Lucia Makhtar. I'm a program manager with the Diversity Institute and Future Skills Center. Juan went into great detail about all the amazing work that we do at the DI. My specific role entails working on the Lifeline Afghanistan portfolio. This project supports the arrival of Afghan refugees into Canada through the private stream as well as the government-assisted stream. With that as well, we also support the employment of the Afghan demographic once they are in Canada. We have created a platform in collaboration with Magnet to really highlight the Afghan demographics, their skills, their education, their experience, their interests, to be matched directly with Canadian organizations that are wanting to hire Afghan newcomers. We also engage with Canadian organizations and really encourage them to diversify their workforces and post job opportunities directly to the platform so they can be matched with the Afghan job seekers through Magnet's AI technology. This job matching service really allows both parties to be connected and really allow for the growth in the Canadian economy and diversity with that as well. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell in terms of Lifeline Afghanistan. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Lucia. So I wanted to get us started by just asking the three of you, from your experience in the work that you and your organizations have been doing, what are the most significant barriers to employment for newcomers? And related to that, in the looking ahead, in the years ahead, do you foresee any new challenges emerging or some of the current ones increasing or decreasing for that matter? So that's again going the same order, if you will. Sarana.
Thank you. So really great question. And you touched on some of those particular challenges in your presentation earlier, issues around lack of Canadian work experience. We work to getting newcomers proficiency in English so that they can have a level of proficiency to work in their fields. You touched on the criticality of difficulty in obtaining credential recognition or recognition of foreign work. And of course, we want to talk about workplace discrimination and societal discrimination that they face based on race, ethnicity, and country of origin, which reduces labor market attachment rates. So I really want to speak a little bit to the second part of your query. What are some of the new challenges that we'd anticipate? With the announcement that would, over the next 3 years, be 1.5 million immigrants will be brought to Canada, there will be some labor market challenges. And I think one of the potential challenges is the impact of automation and artificial intelligence on the job market. As technology continues to advance, some jobs may become obsolete while others may require new skills and knowledge. And do we have the requisite number of investments from various levels of government around bridging and skills building and rapid skills development for newcomers to transition into the labor market quickly? So newcomers may face difficulties in adapting to these challenges, and particularly if they lack the education or training required for emerging fields, and if we continue to see decrease in public sector spending to help them acquire those skills. Another potential is I think we try to move on that the COVID-19 pandemic still has ongoing impact, and it significantly impacted the job market. We all know business closed, business reduced operations, and newcomers who face barriers to employment already may find it even more challenging to secure a job in this really uncertain and a very competitive labor market, especially as we have consideration and conversation around recession and so forth. And we anticipate that discrimination and bias in the hiring process. You talked about some of the ways in which organizations could make shifts in how they embrace talent. Those discrimination biases in the hiring process will remain a persistent challenge for newcomers. And that would definitely impact the labor market attachment rates that we will see in those group. So we know despite efforts like Organizational Skills for Change, the Diversity Institute and others to promote diversity and equity and inclusion and the value of diversity from a business sense, there are still biases in the job market that prevents newcomers from accessing employment opportunities, whether it's issues around accent or your education is not equivalent to Canadian education. It's just, basically you're Black or you're Muslim or you wear a hijab, and we don't want that in our workplace. And there may be barriers that are very upfront or subtle, where that prevents newcomers from accessing the jobs that they have the talent to do. But these challenges are significant. We also can see opportunities to address them. We can do so by continuing to provide education and training opportunities that equip newcomers with skills they need to succeed in emerging fields. So at Skills for Change, for example, we have a large project funded by TD Bank around the green economy. We have pre-apprenticeship programs into the trades because we know that there's significant labor gaps. And so we can help newcomers to adapt to change in market conditions. And so by continuing to provide support and guidance through the pandemic like we did and beyond, we can help newcomers navigate these challenging job search and employment issues through mentorship, through network building, and through what's being done at the Diversity Institute and Skills for Change and others here for advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can create a more welcoming and inclusive environment for all job seekers, including newcomers.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Those are very, and the items on the horizon that you highlight, I think, are really important to keep in mind in the sense of energizing a lot of these dynamics, right? And creating new challenges in other cases. So thank you, Sarana. Patrick.
No, thank you. It's certainly, Sarana's done an excellent job of summarizing the challenges that most of us have been having to face in the sector have seen, for decades now, and Juan, you had those on the slide as well. Personally, I feel that one of the most significant challenges that we have is really, it's a shift in mindset, or a change in mindset as to what we're actually looking for. Foreign credential recognition comes up as a barrier and has for 50, 60 years. And I always find it strange that we emphasize this so much. If you look at the structure of the labor market, 80% of the labor market is unregulated. You don't actually need a credential for that job. So why are we using credentials as a shorthand to screen people out? I worked in the federal government for close to 20 years, and believe me, I did it all the time. It's for fear of getting 500 applications, we'd throw in need a master's, and then you'd whittle that right down. Did that serve us well? No. It really didn't. What it did is it prevented us probably from finding the right person for that job. And so the shift from using credentials or other shorthands for skills, we need to move away from that and actually look at the skills that we need in a given job. We talk about so like what can someone actually do, and I think this is a fundamental problem with our current economic selection system for immigrants, is that the human capital model, the point system, doesn't actually assess human capital. It assesses proxies for human capital. Simply because you studied for a long time doesn't actually mean you're useful for the labor market, right? And I think that people need to understand that there may be some, like, it's going to be used for you somewhere, but are you able to connect with that? And what we've done is kind of set up an immigration system that leads highly skilled immigrants to believe they've been chosen because of what they know. And that's not it at all. And so how do we help newcomers or prospective newcomers understand the skills that they have and can bring to the labor market, but at the same time, help employers understand that what they're actually looking for is skills, and help them get to that, as opposed to saying, well, did you go to the same university as me? And then, of course, the networks, the lack of networks is something is very significant. I don't think I've ever found a job that wasn't because I knew somebody who could point me towards it. If people don't have that, it's certainly a massive barrier. Much like Sarana, when I look to the future, I see these massive numbers that we're about to bring in terms of new permanent residents, and many of them will have already been here as temporary residents. But what are the implications of that for the labor market? I think that we have to look at selection and give employers a greater say in how immigrants in the economic streams are selected. I mean, if we're looking at federal skilled workers, they're going to work for an employer. So how do we help engage employers more readily and more effectively in that process? With 1.5 million new permanent residents coming in a time of economic uncertainty, it's imperative that employers feel well connected to this talent pool. We know historically that immigrants who come in during a recession do really poorly, and they never do well compared to subsequent cohorts again into the future. So they lag behind, they suffer. And two of the prerequisites for support from Canadians for immigration. One is that we believe that immigration actually contributes economically, that it supports the economy. And then the other, of course, is that we know who's coming through the door, that our borders are well secured. And if we start to erode those two things, then that has serious implications for how we can do immigration and how we might even attract immigrants in the future. So certainly some major concerns for me.
Thank you, Patrick. Very, very pointed remarks and very good points. Yeah, having done some work and discussions around micro credentials, the questions of like, how do you show and not from both sides, right? What are you looking for, as well as how and what do you show? Those questions. And I really appreciate your stressing and your underlining the question of the shift, where the shift lies, right, in the mindset. And that just it's a difficult one, as you're all very aware, but I think the one very important level of change. Yes, sorry, Patrick.
So I say it is difficult, but we see lots of employers who are doing it. We certainly work with tons here in BC and our partners right across the country. We say, it's less about, and for some of them, it's less about skill and it's really about values alignment. So it's a business articulating what are their values and then looking for those folks that fit with that, and then they can grow from there. That's a huge shift. Like, I'm not even terribly good at that, truthfully. So it's we all need that extra support and to really take that time to figure it out, which is hard to say when you're trying to grow a business, right?
Absolutely,
Especially SMEs, because that's where the real change is going to happen. That's where the jobs are.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lucia.
Thank you. I think my co-panelists touched greatly upon the main barriers that newcomers are seeking, and I don't want to repeat, but I just will say in terms of the accreditation process, equity is important in terms of providing the same opportunities for certain demographics to accredit certain degrees to enter specific sectors. But beyond that, I think it's also important to provide trauma-informed care for the newcomer demographic, specifically within my day-to-day work, working with refugees. There is a ton of trauma and mental health stressors associated with forced displacement during their during, and post-migration journeys that can definitely create a lot of barriers for them in terms of their sense of self-worth, for day-to-day stressors that they are enduring as a newcomer, as well as within their employment, to be able to advocate on behalf of themselves, to be able to understand that their trauma is a point of resiliency, their experiences that led them to flee their countries can be looked at as a point of surviving these circumstances and not looked at from the lens of victimhood. And I think it's important to allow spaces for these individuals to really understand what trauma has done for their lives, how it's impacting their day-to-day work, as well as for employers to have that sense of trauma-informed career pathing for these demographics to really meet these individuals where they're at and not create further barriers for them in the workplace. So trauma-informed care is something that we should all strive for when supporting refugee populations specifically, and that goes within settlement sectors, that goes with training, that goes from government-funded organizations to really provide the newcomer demographic with the opportunity to look at themselves as survivors and not victims of what they have gone through. And I think that will go a long way for their employment journeys.
If I could jump in, and Lucia, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because Skills for Change actually embraced trauma-informed program delivery in our employment and training programs, even embedding mental health workers in the centers to support our clients. And that's not just for our refugees clients, but even clients that are low income, who are in social assistance and trying to re-enter the labor market for a very long time. And we also embedded it in our Youth Climate Action project around green jobs, because we know having conversations around climate change for many people is very triggering and stressful, especially young people. So we embedded it, in our youth program, a youth worker and mental health, which focus from a climate and sustainability perspective. And it's hugely important to ensure that we have that across all the programs. I'm glad that you mentioned that. It's something that we really embrace in our organization.
Incredible. Thank you, Sarana.
Yeah. Thank you, Lucia and Sarana. The reminder, right, that the categories are really diverse and with very specific needs. So within newcomers and immigrant populations, the specificities of different groups is extremely important to keep in mind. And even within those categories, right, the diversity amongst the refugee populations is also important to keep in mind. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit and just ask you about what impact do you see recruitment of hiring of newcomers having on day-to-day work? I mean, another way of putting that question might be, what opportunities do you think recruitment and hiring of newcomers provide to organizations, right? And I mean, some of you have already started talking as well about some of the concrete actions to make that happen. So feel free as well to include that in your comments. So Sarana, let's start with you.
Thank you. You touched on some of these pieces, but we are in an increasingly globalized world, and the labor market in Canada should reflect that. Newcomers could bring to an organization, whether small organizations or large, diverse perspective. We know, the range of cultural backgrounds, lived and professional experiences and perspectives that they bring to the workplace can lead to more creativity, innovative problem solving, as well as to support improved decision making. So I think that's really valuable. And having a multilingual workforce in a globalized world is key. And we know that many newcomers are multilingual. And they can provide those language competencies that are very valuable to Canadian organizations and give them a competitive edge. And this can be particularly useful for businesses that have clients or customers from diverse backgrounds. As the Diversity Institute does and has shown the increased productivity that is gained from having a diverse workplace. We have seen, having worked with multiple organizations and employer partners to hire our newcomer talent or clients, and who are well suited for their roles, and they can benefit from the enthusiasm, motivation, and the fresh ideas that they bring to the table. And this can result in increased productivity and critically too, a more positive work environment. The fact that newcomers bring an extended global network from different geographies that they're coming from, they can bring those valuable networks and connections to their employers, and that could help them expand their reach and build new business opportunities and access those opportunities they may not have had opportunities to engage with. And of course, that increases their bottom line. But also bringing an increasing diversity in your organization could contribute to improving the retention of employees, because now you could contribute potentially to that belonging part of DEI work. So newcomers who come in, they help to create a space where they feel valued and included in the workplace. They're more likely to stay with the organization long term. This can reduce turnover and the costs associated with hiring and training and bringing new folks in. And helping these organizations to have a stable and importantly experienced workforce. And when they bring in new people who would feel that it could belong and to be connected is very, very important. I think we talk about immigrants, refugees who left their home country, they're moving forward, leaving families, networks, and a steady job to build a new home and a life in Canada shows that they can adapt, right? These are life-changing events moving across the world for many. And that could demonstrate a willingness to adapt to different environments, which can have skills that they can bring to the employers, the ability to switch gears and take a new project, resourcefulness, determination, motivation to do and adjust. I think all that is very valuable to corporations. And I think finally, it does enhance the corporate image and the brand. I mean, for example, here at Skills for Change, we're a very, very diverse organization. And that was reflected in recently that we won Charity Village's top employers with 20 plus employees. We have over 100 in diversity, equity, and inclusion because of the diversity of our organization. Our corporate brand automatically was enhanced. A lot of people, want to be with us. Organizations reach out to seek our advice on how we've diversified our workplace. And most importantly, our colleagues come in and feel safe and connected and that they belong. And I think that's very, very important for organizations of all sizes to embrace diversity and inclusion by bringing in newcomer talent.
Wow, thank you very much. A lot of contributions and such a wide range of positive effects. Patrick.
Certainly. I mean, first and foremost, businesses who figure this out, who figure out how to recruit from an immigrant talent pool, have a competitive advantage. I mean, talk to businesses, and you look at the news, and you look at other economic sort of indicators, and jobs are going unfilled. So there are people out there who can do the work in many cases. And so if you're one of those businesses who's figured out how to tap into this new talent pool, you have a competitive advantage over those who don't. And so right then and there's your impact on your day-to-day, is that you have somebody there to do the work. And then not only do you have that somebody, that mind and those hands to do the work, then you have all these benefits that Serena just talked about. So these global networks, it's a different perspective that can be brought in. And Serena spoke to Diversity Institute's research, and there are other organizations out there that have done research that clearly point out to an economic dividend to diversity. Like if you have a more diverse workforce, your revenue goes up. And depending on the type of industry you're in, your revenue might go up by 1 or 2%, or it might go up by about 10%, especially in the more creative industries. So right then and there, you have a very clear impact. I think what employers and what we in the sector need to keep in mind and to communicate, one is that businesses are in business to make money. Like ultimately, if there isn't a bottom line, that's a healthy one, the business doesn't exist. And so we need to keep that in mind. That's because if it doesn't, it isn't about corporate social responsibility first and foremost. It's about, are they able to do what they're supposed to do as a business? That's their role in society. And they're supposed to do it ethically and all that. They must do it that way. And the vast majority do. There's a reason the bad ones make the news, right? And certainly with us, the ones who we work with tend to migrate towards the much more socially benevolent ones as well. I think to keep in mind too is that we're talking about job ready newcomers. It doesn't matter how they got here. It doesn't matter what immigration stream they used to get here. They bring skills. How do we make sure that we can how do we help the employer plug them into the workplace in an effective way? But also keeping in mind that bringing in an immigrant into the workplace, it's not like you've all of a sudden got a whole host of new challenges to onboarding someone into the workplace. You have to onboard anybody into the workplace. I'm born and raised in Canada, educated in Canada, lived in Nova Scotia, in Ontario, and now British Columbia. When I started this job, they had to onboard me. They had to integrate me into the workplace, and even with the title CEO. So let's not think that we go from zero. There's no such thing as the off the rack employee, right? That you can just throw on. And fits perfectly. We have to do that work, and dynamic workplaces are finding and being very intentional on how they do it. There'll just be some nuances on how to do it with a newcomer population, keeping in mind the newcomer population is every bit as diverse as the Canadian population. So we've talked about trauma-informed workplaces and whatnot, and so depending on the individual that you're hiring and the experience that they have, maybe a different type of lift to make sure that it goes smoothly.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Lucia.
Thank you. I think Serena and Patrick really touched upon the main points, but I really would like to just underscore the resilience that the specifically refugee demographic has, and their ability to adapt to changing environments, and how that can be a huge asset for Canadian organizations here, especially as they integrate into Canada, and they are challenging many. They're enduring many challenges, starting a new language, being away from loved ones back home, integrating into a new society. All of these different challenges really speak to their resiliency, which is huge for day-to-day work. A lot of skills can be learned to fulfill a certain, job title, obligations within a role, but these soft skills, resiliency, ability to leverage all of your resources to get the most desired outcomes, these can't be learned. These are traits that individuals carry. and they come truly with the refugee demographic. I also just quickly want to touch upon Patrick's point about how businesses essentially they're there to make money and fulfill their obligation as a business, of course. But I think it's important for us to really challenge them to meet their moral obligation to ensure equity and diversity is maintained within their workplaces. That is also our responsibility when we are supporting and working with refugee and newcomer populations to ensure that there is a place for them in society, and to call on those businesses, organizations, community leaders to make spaces for them. So that's what I would like to just highlight. I think Serena and Patrick, like I said, really detailed the main points. So thank you.
Thank you, Lucia. Thank you, Serena. Thank you, Patrick. What a rich conversation. Always a lot to learn, a lot to be reminded of. I'm cognizant of the time, and I will pass the word to Andrea to close for final comments and any final issues. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all for that very insightful discussion. I think although we didn't have too much time for audience questions today, I did see some being answered sort of live. And so thank you to the panelists for doing that. And I think that it was such an in-depth discussion that you likely answered probably a lot of folks' questions just in the conversation, and we so appreciate all of your perspectives. I will keep the comments short, but I just want to thank you all, of course, again for attending, our audience members for joining us, and I just want to underscore that we do have 4 more sessions that will be taking place throughout the month of March on topics such as leveraging diversity in procurement, what diversity and inclusion means for marketing, inclusive human resource practices, and of course, next Thursday, March 14th, we have a webinar on diversity in leadership based on the 50-30 challenge, which was discussed in today's presentation. So I encourage you all to join us and to keep this conversation going throughout your own organizations. It's such an important part of ensuring that we are building inclusive economic growth in the province. And with that said, I will, I just got a correction. It's Tuesday, March 14th, not Thursday. My apologies. I'm already living in the future on the wrong date. So just the correction there. It's taking place next Tuesday, March 14th. But with that being said, thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of our panelists and our speakers for joining us today. And of course, to our fantastic partners for making these events possible. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.